than the civilians. The civilians are not an asset for India to negotiate with. Better to have a dictatorial government of military people who, at least like Nixon in China, as it were, can take risks that politically no weak civilian government can take. By definition, a civilian government cannot make peace with India because they can't sell it to the military. A strong military government, if for tactical reasons or cynical reasons wanted to make peace, only has to sell it to themselves. That is basically the difference. But let me agree with you in the long term. My very, very long-term vision, perhaps beyond the lifetime of anybody on this stage, is that the only way in which we will genuinely have that realization of an Indo-Pakistan relationship like the US-Canada relationship can only be when Pakistan internally has evolved to a point where the military does not have the kind of significant dominance that it has enjoyed since independence, or since the 1950s at any rate. And that situation means we have to work in slow incremental steps towards enlarging the space for the civilian option in civil society. I've advocated this in my book Pax Indica a couple of years ago. More people-to-people relations, more trade, more investment, and if necessary, we should be one-sided. The problem is no government in India has so far been willing to give the Pakistanis more than they're willing to give us. But I believe it's more in our interest to create a constituency for good relations with India in Pakistan than it would be in the interest of the Pakistani establishment. And therefore, I would open up that space and keep sustaining that space, even while taking a tough line with the military establishment, while being as hard and sharp and effective on the security, defense issues, intelligence issues, as we have been, while using diplomacy to contain Pakistan and to limit their options, while strengthening relationships with sponsors and supporters of Pakistan like the US and China and Saudi Arabia. Do all of that, but open up the civic society, because even if it takes 3 or 4 decades, in the long term, that's the only way we're going to have peace with Pakistan.
So we can't. So there's no point in just having a high-level sort of summit meeting here in New York between Nawaz Sharif and Prime Minister.
Total waste of time.
Total waste of time.
At this point, there's no point doing it.
Okay, so you think, let's assume there was a Congress government, you would have advised Prime Minister Manmohan Singh not to meet Nawaz Sharif, because he used to he used to go out of his way when he was in New York last year.
But Rajiv, the context is different. No? We're going through an exercise in which the Indian Prime Minister, not a Congress Prime Minister, invited Nawaz Sharif, met with him, there was sari and shawl exchanges and much bonhomie, and then there was an abrupt cancellation of secretary-level talks. Now, these are decisions my government didn't take. But the government of India did, and I'm an Indian, I can say that after having done that, when you've cancelled your foreign secretaries meeting each other, how can you possibly justify, without any further preparation, any further evolution, the Prime Minister's meeting merely because they happen to be in the same city at the same time? There is no logic behind it, and nothing good can come of it. Therefore, don't do it.
Okay. So it appears that the Congress and the BJP are on the same track on that. You know, there's one other element to this terror before we open it up to the audience, which is it's not just terror now emanating necessarily from the Lashkar. The radicalization of groups now extends across several parts, and it extends both ways. We've heard of Indian youth, Mr. Sandhu, who are now going to fight wars in Iraq and Syria. Not too many, but there is some evidence of young Indian Muslim youth going to these parts. Does that worry you, that now the nature of the challenge has become far more complex than ever before? And therefore, the Indian state and the Indian intelligence needs to respond to it in a very different way.
Let me first respond to what Hussain Saab said a little while back. I'm not surprised that you didn't find the India file in the Foreign Office. It's never been there. The Army's never ever given up charge of that file. And it's a fact that substantial progress was made.
So the file does exist, but it's in the Army headquarters.
Absolutely.
So that's why Mr. Haqqani wasn't given access to the file. So the file does exist,
Absolutely.
but he wasn't given access. Okay. And did we come very close, because you were very close to resolving it?
Absolutely.
We came very close to resolving Kashmir when Dr. Manmohan Singh and Musharraf met.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Of course, coming back to the other point about radicalization of Indian youth, it's not a new phenomenon. You've known for a long time that we've had our radical fringes. You've had the Students' Islamic Movement of India. Within that, there was an ultra-radical fringe called the Kafila-e-Sakht Jan, and so on and so forth. This is something that's persisted with us for the last 30 or 35 years. It's only that the opening up of the world has created opportunities for people to travel across borders. It's a fact that many of our youth who go for employment, who are part of the diaspora in the Middle East, have been subverted in the Middle East and taken across to Pakistan for training. And among them were Simi activists, Many of them came back and formed what's now popularly known as the Indian Mujahideen, which has basic Lashkar linkages. But the fact is that we have a radical fringe. We have youth who are estranged, and we have not yet been able to construct an effective enough counter-radicalization program. And that's something that nations in the world worry about. We are now engaged in discussions with more than one country, but we don't have an effective and a wide enough and a deep enough counter-radicalization program.
Therefore, the emergence of this global jihadi, you know, it no longer matters what your nationality is. You could be located anywhere in the world, and you're part of this sort of amorphous terror group, which one day could be called ISIL, operating in Syria and Iraq, in the Levant, and then another day could be operating in another part of the world. Does that not worry you, and does that change the nature in which states now need to tackle the challenge of terror? Mr. Haqqani?
Do you want me to address that?
Yeah,
yes, absolutely.
I mean, how do you tackle the global jihadi now?
Look, the global jihadi, of course, needs to be deprived of safe havens, training facilities, organizing facilities, because let us be honest, there have been other occasions in the world when people have tried to change the world through terrorism. There are historic examples. They never controlled territories sufficiently strongly to be able to make them safe havens. And whenever there have been states that have sponsored terrorism, the rest of the world has tried to isolate them. And that is the manner in which the world has dealt with state-sponsored terrorism. So the global jihadi is a phenomenon. One needs to counter the ideology. I think that both India and Pakistan have an interest in countering the ideology of global jihad. So do all of the Middle Eastern countries. And there can be a grand international coalition. But unfortunately, the role of certain states, which parses the definition of terrorist, is not going to make it easy for a grand global coalition against terrorism. After 9/11, there was an attempt to do that. There is an attempt to do that now after the rise of ISIL. But eventually, this will have to be a much longer war, and it won't just have to be a war. It'll have to be an ideological war. And while I have the mic, let me just make one little observation. Anybody who thinks that we were on the cusp of an agreement, but just because one individual left his position, that agreement was not possible, is deluding himself. If the army had really come on board with Musharraf's agreement or a deal with India, then after he left, General Kiani would have told the civilian government, go ahead and sign this agreement with our blessing. They did not, which is the reason why I say be very, very skeptical of talks that look like being on the verge of agreement and do not let you come to the agreement. That basically is usually a way of long-term engagement. It's very convenient that General Musharraf disappears, and if the file does exist in the GHQ, which I'm sure it does, according to you, then they should have moved forward. The fact they didn't move forward is because of the reasons that Shashi and I listed out in the beginning. Interests, desire to control Pakistan a certain way, and an obsession with what is known as the ideology of Pakistan, instead of focusing on the prosperity of Pakistan and the people of Pakistan.
Okay. I know that your troubles with General Musharraf are far from over, so I can see where you're coming from, and you still remain skeptical of Musharraf. But let's get a couple of questions from the audience. Yes, the lady there. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much. This is a question for Mr. Sandhu.
If you could hold the mic.
Oh, sorry. This is a question for Mr. Sandhu. The previous moderator mentioned that the BJP government is a macho government, which implied, of course, that the previous government was, you know, very emasculated, effete, weak, spineless government. And for the last 65 years, the government either looked the other way or actively encouraged terrorism. And Mr. Shashi Tharoor, who was part of that particular government, said India cannot go into Pakistan and take action. But you are the only person who has actual experience with intelligence, whereas the rest are just speakers. So I would like to know your view on the matter.
Your view about whether the BJP is going to change that?
Yes, can they do it, and will they just keep talking? Because you're the person who actually has worked in the field of intelligence, whereas the rest of them have not. So you, as a person in that particular field and as a specialist, is the BJP in a position to do so, and will they do so? What do you think?
Let me just say that I've been in this business since the early 80s. I've seen governments of different parties. There's been consistency in the way in which we've approached terrorism. And there's been a steady incremental in the way in which we've handled it. I don't see the new government doing anything very, very different, such as crossing borders and so on, because that's not what you can do in this day and age.
Because now you have an intelligence bureau chief who's the national security advisor. I mean,
Yes,
I've often wondered whether that means that we could finally take out a Dawood Ibrahim who's apparently sitting in Karachi. We know exactly where he's sitting.
I think the issue is never taking somebody out. The issue is dealing with the morning after. And that's really the issue in this case. This is an oversimplification. And very frankly, look...
But certain countries do. Certain countries do.
Yes, but let's be honest. Let us try and visualize a situation in which Syria, for example, under Hafiz al-Assad, had nuclear weapons. Do you think Israel would have been able to act the way it did with Syria? So let us be realistic. There are constraints. One is not saying that those constraints are desirable, but they are the reality. And I very frankly get a little upset with all of us. We are part of the same DNA. We are all part of the South Asian milieu of subcontinent. We all have this tendency for the rhetorical flourish. You know, we like talking about usko ulta latka denge, usko seedha kar denge. But the truth is that these are complex issues. There are reasons why previous Indian governments, for whom I hold no brief, that they haven't done certain things, and I think it is good that they haven't, because we do not want to climb the escalatory ladder. We want to resolve these issues, but we do not want our region, our world, to actually go up in flames.
Okay, let me just get a couple of quick questions. Someone who's not asked a question before, please. Yes.
My name is Surinder Verma. I have a question for Honorable Mr. Hakini. As you know, you was talking about mutual understanding and everything, we do agree. But this is the only one country in whole world, United States is supporting Pakistan financially lot, and still they are burning their American flag. India is welcoming Pakistan lot, but they are betraying with India. How come every single president of Pakistan is in murder or left the country while you think things are very normal? और आपका जो आपने एक श्लोक बोला उसके लिए ये है कि बहुत दूर है इंडिया के पार्लियामेंट से पाकिस्तान के घर का किनारा इंटेलिजेंस ब्यूरो इंडिया की छान लेती है हवा से क्या रुख है तुम्हारा थैंक यू
I think that one is best left unplayed.
Okay. One final question. Yes, Mr. Sareshwala, you had a question here.
No, actually, I would just like to comment what Mr. Sandhu said about radicalization of Muslims in India. I would differ because I have been associated with Muslim communities and most, which you named, Jamaat-e-Islami, SIM and all that. In India, there is absolutely no radicalization. I mean, if you, out of 20 million, if 1,500 or 2,000 take up something like IM, I think this does not make any case. It is not in the DNA of Indian Muslims to have any, forget about being extreme, they cannot even have that fundamentalistic view about religion. Islam in India is very moderate. So I also, till I didn't go to USA and UK in 95, I didn't know what extreme Islam is. Right. So that Islam which we have in India is absolutely moderate. And I have not yet in my life of 30 years since I've been out, I have not found any IM guy or somebody who has these kind of views. So they must be 1,500, 2,000, but you cannot make case out of that. So okay. I just wanted to make that
I think that's
comment.
a strong point to make. I'm going to end with you, Shashi, as a final word. Do you believe that we will come back to this very forum 10 years from now and be perhaps still stuck in this quagmire of either blame game or, or still being accusatory? Do you really believe that India and Pakistan are capable of rising above this, above themselves almost, and finding a way forward? Are you hopeful about the future or pessimistic? Because many in America believe Pakistan remains the most dangerous place in the world, and it will be impossible, it will become even more difficult to deal with an unstable Pakistan in the future.
Look, I'm a chronic optimist. I've been accused rightly of that in many contexts. But I think that ultimately this can only change if the Pakistani military establishment perceives it to be in its self-interest for change to come. Now, there are various ways in which that might occur. I mean, one of the problems right now is that they continue to get an enormous amount of international support because of their fight against one kind of terrorism. So the Americans are pumping money into them in order to fight the so-called Pakistani Taliban, while they continue to encourage the other Taliban that attacks us and attacks Afghanistan. I mean, the notion that the terrorists who attacked the Marriott in Islamabad are bad, but the ones who attacked the Taj in Mumbai are good, has not completely left significant elements of the Pakistani military establishment. But if, for example, some of that funding starts drying up, if the world's stake in Afghanistan and India increases to a point where they actually start producing powerful disincentives for this sort of action, if the space within civic society in Pakistan enlarges to a point where the constituency for relations with India becomes more irresistible than it now is, there's so many big ifs, then yes, I think we can see some movement, because the Pakistani military will want, of course, a certain place in their own society, but they won't want to jeopardize that place by being completely out of sync with the rest of their society. These are straws in the wind. These are one is clutching at, but it's the best we can hope for. 10 years ago, if you had asked the question, would we be back in 10 years saying the same things, we wouldn't have said anything very different. I mean, I actually came across a couple of things I wrote in 2007, 2008, and it was before 26/11. I realized that, you know, one is saying precisely the same thing since. So I don't really believe right now that we have enough elements for grounding a conclusion that things will be different in 10 years. But we have to keep chipping away at it, and that's what our government did for 10 years. How close we came is a matter of dispute. Certainly the perception in Pakistan is that we didn't come very close. But I know the Prime Minister acted with tremendous good faith. He really, really believed in this. It didn't work out, not for lack of effort on our part. We'll continue chipping away with it, but above all, we'll keep India safe. And I'm sure that the new government, as Mr. Sandhu said, the new government will not be doing anything very different. We've seen governments of 4 different political persuasions in the time that he's been in intelligence. And we've basically seen a pretty consistent line. So I think we can expect some continuity with the present government also.
Okay. On that note, which is only partly hopeful, I'm afraid, because it suggests that we may well be back here in New York in a few years' time, perhaps looking at it as a zero-sum game, which would be worrying. Let's still hope that there can be more imaginative solutions in the war against terror. Shashi Tharoor, Hussain Haqqani, Mr. Sandhu, thank you very much, and to the audience, thank you very much.
Hello?
Where are you?
I can't make it. Feeling really sick.
Liar.
Oh, high fever. Wait, check this out.
103? Oh, you poor thing.
For crystal clear selfies, Lava Iris X5 with 5 MP front camera, front flash and a wide angle lens. Lava Iris X5. We put the art in smart.
Hey, wake up. We're home.
Oh my God.
More comfort, more power in the new Mahindra Xylo.
कानों में झूमते हैं, गर्दन चूमते हैं, उंगलियों पे इतराते हैं, कमर पे बल खाते हैं। औरत का श्रृंगार है, गहनों से बहुत 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 प्यार है।
वो तो है।
World's most beautiful jewelry at Gitanjali Jewels. क्या डिजाइन है?
सर, प्राइस भी अच्छा है। चलो, इतना लेट कर रहे हो तुम। 1 मिनट, यंग लग रहे हो, मुझसे भी यंग।
यंग तो तुम भी हो।
3 घंटे मैंने बिताए पार्लर में, और यंग दिखो तुम।
नया कलेक्शन था और
प्राइस भी बजट के अंदर।
टाइटन आई प्लस का नया फ्लेयर कलेक्शन ₹995 से शुरू।
बच्चों को रोज कितना दूध पीना चाहिए?
दिन में 2 ग्लासेस मिनिमम।
और पढ़ाई?
1 से 2 घंटे एटलीस्ट।
और छोटे, आपको इनके फ्यूचर के लिए कितना SIP करना चाहिए?
आप दूध पीजिए
और आप पढ़ाई कीजिए। बाकी सब के लिए आप राइट अमाउंट जानते हैं। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड में निवेश के लिए भी राइट सिस्टमैटिक इन्वेस्टमेंट प्लान अमाउंट जानना जरूरी है। लॉग ऑन करें www.icicipru.mf.com पर।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
मनाले 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 मेरे यार, आया खुशियों का त्योहार, आया खुशियों का त्योहार।
Write a holiday review. Holiday IQ.
मनाले 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 मेरे यार, आया खुशियों का त्योहार, आया खुशियों का त्योहार।
Surround your senses with the world's first curved UHD TV from Samsung.
Through the Mystic Eye shows Sadhguru in his multifacets. Eminent personalities from various walks of life in conversation with Sadhguru. This episode features Miss Suchitra K. Ella. Watch as she asks Sadhguru about rape in India and women having a balance between work and being a mother.
Your continuous trust and support has been making us grow year on year. Star Health Insurance, for all the health insurance needs. Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
Today Global Roundtable. Also with us here in New York, one of the sharpest minds in Indian politics, former UPA Minister, Mr. Jairam Ramesh. To give us a perspective from Capitol Hill, Director of the all-important India Caucus in the U.S. Senate, Mark Bruner. And National Secretary and emerging light of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party in Delhi, Siddharth Nath Singh. Thank you all very much for joining us. I want to begin by getting Ambassador Frank Wisner to explain to the audience here at the India Today Global Roundtable about what can possibly be achieved, most crucially in this visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the meeting between the American President and our Prime Minister, so as to set India and Washington on a path where we can achieve the full potential of the relationship.
Well, first of all, let me thank you very much for including me on this panel and at this moment. I'm delighted to be here, in this case with 3 very good friends, and delighted to have the chance to meet and talk to all of you. I'm enormously excited about the prospect of the Prime Minister's visit and his first face-to-face meeting with President Obama. I believe it's vital as an American that this visit be a success, and I am absolutely confident that it will be. But measuring the success is a slightly different question. I believe at base point, the visit is a success because it's occurred, because the two chiefs of government and state have met and have reset a relationship that is of deep strategic significance to both our countries. They need, in this meeting, to set a path that will carry us beyond the end of the Obama presidency and for however many terms in office the Prime Minister will serve. But that means years out. We have the chance, therefore, of fixing strategic relations between the United States and India, not for 1, 2, or 3 years, 1, 2, or 3 crises, but for up to a decade. So getting our minds together, understanding one another, realizing each other's potential is absolutely critical. That's the core accomplishment. When the two men come together, it also means that two societies are talking at many levels. So let me be more specific. I think at this stage in the relationship, we can look at India and the United States working well together in a variety of ways. We mix and greet one another culturally, and our Indian-American community is vibrant and productive. We have many things that work. There are two issues in particular we have to be careful about. One is the relationship between our two countries as we face foreign policy and strategic questions, and the second is the commercial business, trade, investment sphere. I hope these two men will sit down on this visit and fix their minds around the major foreign policy and national security issues of the age, and understand how each other looks at those questions. What is the other man's constraints, his perspectives, his ambitions, his goals, and why? How we will both live with the rise of Chinese power. How we both will manage and cope with Afghanistan as the American troops complete their assigned role in that country. How to deal with the vexing issue we just listened to, Pakistan, the decline of the authority of the Pakistani state and the continued disruptions in your relations with Pakistan. These are huge issues. And from the American perspective, the crisis in the region to your west, the Middle East, in its many dimensions. How each of us see one another, understand one another. On the economic side, I hope they will also agree on two essential facts, and that is each will do his best to solve problems that impede the natural development of trade and investment between our two countries. And there are a variety of issues, many of them you know well, I won't dwell in, but there are American issues as well. There are issues related to immigration reform, issues related to outsourcing. The President and the Prime Minister need to agree that we are about problem solving. But I'd like to think that they will also set their sights on long-term goals and believe that our two countries will work better together in the interests of our respective populations, provided that we are part of open trading regimes, that free trade, freer trade, and one day free trade is a reasonable objective to reduce the barriers that impede the flow of goods and services around the world is the surest way I know to reach the 15 million jobs that Narendra Modi wants for India and to help contribute to the prosperity that Americans seek to sustain, not only for our own interests, but for the health of the global economy.
The offshoot to India-America strategic ties at this time, sir, being in a rut, as Ashley Tellis put it, is that the U.P.A. government, of which you were a crucial part, allowed the New Delhi-Washington relationship to drift to a point where Prime Minister Modi has to now land in New York and try and fix it along with President Obama. Why did your government, in your view, what's your defense of the fact that the sense is that over the past few years, New Delhi and Washington haven't been able to realize the full potential of this relationship and things have been allowed to drift?
Well, Rahul, first of all, I'm here in a professional capacity, and I'm not going to be here defending or criticizing anybody. I'm here